Hello everyone, we're back to follow up on the video that I put on YouTube a few days ago. You may possibly remember that we were talking about Jewish faith and festival, and the first video was all about Shabbat, the Sabbath. I want to carry on from there today, and I'm going to tell you a children's story. And then next time I'm going to try and tie together the first video and this video with an idea of what we can learn as Christians from the Jewish festival of Shabbat. My story is a traditional Jewish one from a country called Algeria. And I've actually discovered just a couple of days ago that there is a beautiful picture book made of this. And I've ordered it, and we'll find out whether I tell the story the same way as the book does. And that's the thing, of course, with stories that have been handed down from generation to generation. You find that they change, and so you can hear all sorts of different versions of the same story. So forgive me if you know the story, but the way I tell it is different from the way you learnt it. So, once there was a man whose name was Joseph. Oh, he was a very poor man. He didn't have a big house. It was a ramshackle old shed. He didn't have nice clothes to wear. Most of the things he put on his back were darned and mended and very thin and threadbare too. He didn't have nice food to eat. In fact, most of the time he lived off scraps. In every way, poor old Joseph was looked down upon by nearly everybody in the town where he lived because he was so poor. One thing about Joseph, though, that you should know is that Joseph was a very devout man. Every day he said his prayers to God. Every day he read God's word. He was a good man, a Jewish man at that. He kept all of the feasts and the festivals, and in particular, he was very careful to keep the Sabbath day holy. Well, one evening there was a knock on his door, and Joseph went to the door. He opened it, and outside was a man that he'd never seen before. And the man said, "I've been told by God to come and talk to you. I have to tell you that you're to go to Cairo, that great city. And if you go to Cairo, in the centre of the city, you'll come to a square. In the middle of the square, there's a house. In the middle of the house, there's a room. In the middle of the room, there's a table. And in the middle of the table, there's a box. And if you open the box, you'll find inside money and jewels and precious things that are all yours. You have been so careful to keep the Sabbath and so faithful in your love of God that this is yours." Well, I suppose that sounds a little bit like a very ancient form of the prosperity doctrine, but that's not the way it works. So anyway, Joseph was amazed at this. He'd never been to Cairo. The very thought of going to such a place filled him with fear. How could he find the city, leave alone the square, and leave alone the house and the room and the table and the box on top of it? Began to speak to his friends and asked if they'd ever been to Cairo, and nearly all of them said no. But then he met someone who said he'd never been to Cairo, but he knew someone who had. And he gave Joseph the address of a man who was a guide, a professional guide. And Joseph's friend said for sure this man would help him. So the next day, Joseph went and knocked on the door of the man who he was told was the guide. He told him why he had to go to Cairo. He said he would pay the man richly for taking him. The man said, yeah, of course he'd take him, but it was a very dangerous road. There were all sorts of things on that road. There were bandits, there were wild animals, there were hidden dangers. And so the man said to Joseph that he must ask his friends to come as well, so that together they would keep each other safe. So Joseph went and spoke to his friends again, 1, 2, 3, maybe 10 friends. And they all agreed to come, especially when Joseph said that he would let them share his treasure if they did. But to all of them, all of his friends and to the guide, he said the same thing. On Friday night, when the Sabbath starts, we must have already stopped and made camp. And then we cannot travel again until at the very earliest Saturday night after the sun has gone down. This is the Sabbath. It's a holy day to the Lord and we must not travel. All his friends and the guide agreed to that, and they said they would not travel on that holy day. And so one fine morning they set out. They travelled all day and the next, and they kept travelling until it came to Friday night. And on Friday night, before it got dark, Joseph said, right, gentlemen, we must stop now. We must make camp. And so they did. They made their camp. Joseph leant up against a great rock and he went fast asleep, secure in the knowledge that nobody would want to travel the next day. However, when Joseph woke up in the morning, the first thing that he was aware of was the silence. He could hear no snoring, no heavy breathing. He could hear no sound of people chatting in the early morning. He looked around and he realized what had happened. His treacherous friends and the guide had gone without him. They'd made up their mind, Joseph realized, during the night that they would continue while he was fast asleep, traveling on the Sabbath day so that they could get to Cairo. They could get to the square and the house and the room and the table and, most important of all, the box first. They would share it amongst themselves and leave Joseph with nothing. Joseph could do nothing. How could he? He couldn't travel after them on the Sabbath day because that would be breaking the Sabbath. He just had to sit there. And as he sat with his back against the rock, suddenly he heard a noise. Very quiet at the beginning. What on earth could it be? It seemed to be coming from behind the rock. The noise got louder and louder, and Joseph stood up quickly and he began to step away from the rock when around from the back of the rock came the biggest lion that he could ever have imagined. He began to run away from the lion, but as he ran as fast as he'd ever run in his life before, he could hear the sound of footsteps behind him. And the worst thing of all was that the footsteps were getting closer and closer, and suddenly he felt a weight upon both of his shoulders that pushed him to the ground until his face was buried in the sand of the desert. He turned onto his back and he looked up into the face of the lion with its great fangs glistening in the morning sun. And then something happened. The last thing in the world he expected to happen. The lion spoke. Joseph, said the lion. How does he know my name? Thought Joseph. Joseph, stand up. And the lion stepped away from him so that he could rise to his feet. Climb on my back, Joseph. Because you have continued to be faithful, I will take you to Cairo. Joseph climbed on the back of the massive lion, and the lion began to run faster and faster until its feet left the ground and the lion was flying through the air. Looking down, Joseph could see in the distance the crowd of his friends labouring through the desert. No stopping for Joseph. He continued on the back of the lion till he came to the great city of Cairo. He was taken to the square, to the house, to the room, to the table, to the box. He opened the box and sure enough there were precious things. He picked them up and he climbed back onto the lion, and the lion ran again so fast that his feet left the ground and took him back to his home far away. Joseph used that money for all sorts of things. He used it to make his house a little more secure and warm for the cold nights. He used it to buy new clothes, but not clothes that cost lots of money, just so that they didn't have holes in them. Every now and again he had a nice meal. A lot of the money he gave to the poor. A lot of the money he shared with his friends. Not the ones who'd left him behind in the desert, but other friends who he knew were true friends. So there's my story. Well, it's not my story, it's a traditional story, and it's all about the importance of keeping the Sabbath. We live in a different day. We're not Jewish. Most of us who are listening to this, we're Christian people. But nevertheless, the Sabbath is from God, a gift and a commandment. We'll talk about it more and what it means to us as Christians next time. Thanks very much. Bye for now. God bless you.